Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 423. Thank you for joining me today. I have a lot of stuff left over from the last podcast that we're going to get back into in this podcast. I want to get through this podcast so we can get back into the crises of the racial tribalism and all that going on, because I have a lot to say about that, but I'm still laying some groundwork in this rise of Marxism and what we've been talking about in the last podcast. So I don't know where this podcast is going to go. I have a lot to share with you. We'll see how much of it we get through. Hopefully, if we get through everything, then I can pick up and start getting into more of this racial tribalism, this intentional racial tribalism that is going on, and kind of break down some of that. But what we've been talking about in the past few podcasts is the crisis of the third century, the crisis of the United States third century. That we're in our third century. We celebrated the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence a week ago. But like I was explaining to you, that the Declaration of Independence, that wasn't the founding of this country. The 4th of July is not a celebration celebrating the founding of the United States. It wasn't the 250th anniversary of the United States, because the United States didn't become a country until over a decade later. But we are in our third century, and we are in the middle of a crisis that is a collection of different crises that are bringing us to this moment of crises that we're in our third century. And I've been relating it to the crisis of the third century of the Roman Empire. In the third century, the Roman Empire went through a crisis that transformed the Roman Empire forever. It was the Roman Empire was never the same the way that it was at the height of the Roman Empire, the zenith, which was Pax Romana. And I'm saying, and asking the question, what is going to be the future of the United States? Will the United States still be around and be a united 50 states the way that it is right now, 100 years from now, 200 years from now? Or will it be fragmented? Or will it change altogether and be conquered by an outside power? What's going on? And we are also relating it to the statement quote from Alexander Tyler, the French judge and historian. I'm going to go ahead and read it again because I think it's very relevant to everything that we've been talking about. That Tyler says that, the average amount of time for great empires, great nations, is around 200 years. That in that third century, that these all great empires, not just the Roman Empire, all great empires, all great societies, nations, start to experience decline in the third century. That this is something that has been experienced throughout human history. In the historian Alexander Tyler says that a democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. Democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts, largesse, from the public treasury. And we explained in the last podcast, this is the public treasury right here. Public treasury is $39.4 trillion in debt is what the public treasury is. And the public treasury is supported by taxpayers. The taxpayers per taxpayer in the United States is $356.6 just under $400,000 in debt per taxpayer. $356,000 per taxpayer, $400 trillion. This is the public treasury right here. This is what Alexander Tyler is talking about when he says that a democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts, largesse, from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority of voters will always vote for the candidate that promises the most benefits from the public treasury, with the results of every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policies, which is always followed by dictatorship. Dictatorship, bondage is in his cycle. Dictatorship, bondage, totalitarian rule, as Orwell envisions in 1984. This is what it is, the cycle that Alexander Tyler identified. That you go, that these nations that rise up, that last for about 200 years and then start to experience crisis in the third century. They go from bondage. They go from bondage to faith, to courage, to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance. And it's all about me, the selfishness, the, if you go and you watch, if you haven't watched the documentary, The Century of the Self, talking about the 20th century and what these people that I'm talking to you about, what they did, you know, the 19th century was the century of the self. If you watch that documentary, it lays out Bernays propaganda and all that stuff. So from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependence, and then from dependence to bondage is what Alexander Tyler said. So, we talked about the fact that the Roman Empire, who were relating our third century crisis to the different crises that they were dealing with in the third century, some of them parallel to the crises that we're dealing with in our third century crisis, but some of them were unique to the Roman Empire. We have our own unique crises right now, but they had barbarian invasion and migrations. We have migration crisis and invasion, immigrant invasion crisis. We're going to get to that. That's one of the crises that that's going to be on the list. Civil wars and peasant rebellions. We don't have that yet. Political instability. You know, political instability. The first crisis that we identified in our series is the election crisis, and I would say that is political instability. These are the. Hold on, let me get this. Come on, there you go. These are the crises we've identified so far: election crises, education crises, debt crises, the crisis of treason, the subversion and fifth column trying to take us down from within. That's a crisis. The racial tribalism crises, which I'm itching to get. I want to get back into this because there's a lot that I need to explain with number 5. And then the Marxism crisis, the rise of Marxism, socialism, communism, whatever you want to call it. And so we're hanging out here. I'm flushing out more of the rise of Marxism because, as I've explained, all of these, the first 5 relate to number 6. So, political instability, the Romans were dealing with. I would say that our election crisis is political instability. I mean, in the past 20 years, you've had electoral votes from 2 separate states contested by members of the House of Representatives and the Senate. In the past 20 years, it's happened twice. Before that, it had happened in over 100 years before 2004, when it happened the first time in 100 years. And it's happened again since then. So twice in the past 22 years. That's crises. That's political instability. Multiple usurpers. We don't have that yet. Debasement of currency. We absolutely have debasement of currency, people. This is a paralleling crises that we have today that the Roman Empire had. Debasement of currency, breakdown of trade networks and economic productivity. We don't have that yet. And plague. I mean, we had COVID, but even COVID, we're going to get there. Anyway, these are the crises that we've identified so far: election crisis, education crisis, debt crisis. You should go back. If you haven't watched these podcasts where I break down each of these crises, go back and check them out. So we're hanging out here at crisis number 6, and we have been for the past couple of podcasts talking about the rise of Marxism. If you don't recognize the rise of Marxism and socialism and the fact that it's being more accepted in our society, and it's taken over one of our political parties. I don't know what to tell you, but like I have been telling you and trying to explain to you, that it's no accident that socialism, Marxism is on the rise. It's very intentional. The conditions have been created that are ideal for socialism to rise. Ideal. The conditions have been created. It's not by accident, because we are being subverted from within by a fifth column, by traitors who want to take down our nation from within, and they're subverting us. They're not attacking us from the north, south, east, or west. They're attacking us through the fifth column from within, deceitfully, deceptively, sneakily, cunningly, trying to take us down from within. And they've been very effective. We've been also relating the rise of Marxism to the two masterpieces written by Eric Blair, George Orwell, first Animal Farm, and then 1984, Animal Farm, about the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917, October Revolution, and then the 1984 is what comes after the revolution. 1984 is about what comes after the revolution. And I've explained to you that these people, it's not only these DSA people on the street voting for socialism, that want socialism, the Bernie Sanders of the world, the AOCs of the world, those people who want socialism. These people want socialism. How do I know that these people want socialism? It's because these people are the ones who created the environment, created the circumstances that make socialism ideal. And they did it very intentionally. Can't stress that enough. Can't stress that enough. So these people want socialism too. They did it to you. Why do they want socialism? Well, because I've been explaining to you, when you understand Marxism and the two class dichotomy, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, looking at socialism from the perspective of the bourgeoisie is very different than looking at socialism, Marxism, from the perspective of the proletariat. These people have set themselves up and their friends to be the permanent bourgeoisie and to keep working class people in a permanent state of being a proletariat. That's why houses are so expensive. That's why everything, they're the ones debasing, they debased the currency. They're the ones who did this. And I've shown you this. This is no argument that anyone can make that our debt started to rise in 2000 in the Bush administration. It started to rise as the war on terror started after 9/11. You can start seeing here that this is when the debt started to get outrageous because of a crisis. A crisis, actually, they set up from crisis to crisis, as you're getting ready to see. We're getting ready to get into that about crises. But in the last podcast, we were talking about this idea in wrestling, this narrative that takes place, this act that takes place, this production that takes place in professional wrestling, that the heel versus the hero. And it's all designed so the audience doesn't know what's going on, that the heel and the hero are actually working together. They don't want it's designed to make the audience love the hero and hate the heel, but the heel is working with the hero to advance the hero, to make the audience, to make the people cheer for the hero. He's playing a role and they're working together, but the audience traditionally didn't know that the heel and the hero are working together. It's a very deceptive act that the wrestlers are playing to entertain the audience, But in politics, this is what I was explaining in the last podcast. This is a very effective role in politics too. Powerful people setting up a heel, setting up a villain, and working together with the villain to advance and get the people to support the hero. And in the last podcast, I, was making the relation to the heel and hero to George Bush and Bill Clinton. That, I mean, if you know that George H.W. Bush, helped Bill Clinton in his rise. I mean, this is why the 1992 election was so important, because H. Ross Perot comes out of nowhere with his own money, able to fund his own campaign. He doesn't need the party of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party behind him. He runs as an independent. He's buying television time, just explaining how stupid this stuff is, how stupid NAFTA is, and look at what these people are doing to you. He's gathering in the polls, and then he just drops out. Why did he just drop out? Well, a lot of people believe that H. Ross Perot was threatened, and that's why he dropped out. And who knows if he hadn't dropped out, if he could have won the race. But H. Ross Perot was ruining their game. They had a game set up. They were playing the role of hero and heel. They were playing the role. They were working together. It's not just an accident that Barbara Bush is saying that, Bill Clinton is like my fourth son, that he sees George H.W. Bush as a father figure. And George Bush is saying that my mom calls him my fourth brother, the brother from another mother. It's not an accident. And if that's true, if Bill Clinton is a father figure to, or if George H.W. Bush is a father figure to Bill Clinton, just think about that. Now, I didn't say that. Barbara Bush said that. Let's listen to Barbara Bush say that again. I didn't say that.
Your husband and Bill Clinton have become good friends.
That's right. My husband, Bill Clinton, and I have become great friends, and Bill visits us every summer.
He visits us every summer.
Bill's father wasn't around, and I think that he thinks of George a little bit like the father he didn't have, and he's very loving to him, and I really appreciate that.
I'm doing it. My mother calls me my fourth brother. Calls him my fourth brother.
Barbara Bush calls Bill Clinton the fourth brother of Bush. That's how much she loves him. She just said, I love Bill Clinton. I love him. He's very loving to my husband. He sees George H.W. Bush like a father figure. Now, okay, of course they're playing the role of the heel hero, antagonist, protagonist. This is all set up. They're working together. Can't see that. I don't know what to tell you. But if this is true, what Barbara Bush is saying, that Bill Clinton is like her fourth son, and George H.W. Bush is like a father to Bill Clinton, then that would mean that George H.W. Bush had two sons with two-term presidencies. 16 years, George H.W. Bush would have two sons serving as president back to back, 8 years and 8 years, 6 years. That would mean if what Barbara Bush says is true, then George H.W. Bush had two sons that were president back to back people for 16 years. But if you understand who this guy is, you understand that it was longer than that. It was longer than that. And they were trying to set it up again for even longer. Do you understand, people, that if Donald Trump wouldn't run for president in 2016, it was going to be this woman who did get the nomination in 2016 and this guy's brother, Jeb Bush? They were trying to run it for even longer. But yeah, I mean, George H.W. Bush, if you count his 4 years, I've done this podcast before. If you count his 4 years and the 16 years of his two sons, that's 20 years of these guys being president. This happened. This right here. This is our debt. This is what they did, people. This is what I was explaining in the last podcast about the housing crises in the housing and the stock market and banking crash in 2008, and how we have to build. This is a crisis, okay? A crisis that they set up. They set up the crisis. Let me explain to you how they set up the crisis. So all of the deregulation went on during the Bill Clinton administration. George H.W. Bush's son. The deregulating of the derivatives. All of these banks had derivatives that were derivative of what? They were derivative of the real estate market. So when the real estate market was worth nothing, then the derivatives were worth nothing. All of that was deregulated under Bill Clinton and his Treasury Secretary, Robert Rubin, Larry Summers, Fed Chair, Alan Greenspan, also Brown Brothers Harriman. All the deregulation went on during the Clinton administration. And when George Bush came in, 9/11 set up. He's warned many times that terrorists are in the country are warned specifically. They're getting ready to hijack planes and do anything. Let 9/11 happen. And then this is 8 months after 9/11. This is May. You can see the date right down there. May 2002, May 2002. Just 8 months after 9/11. And this is the initiative that George Bush, I was explaining in the last podcast, the home ownership initiative. I want you to listen to what George Bush says here.
I do believe in the American dream. I believe there is such a thing as the American dream. And I believe those of us who have been given positions of responsibility must do everything we can to spotlight the dream and to make sure the dream shines in all neighborhoods, all throughout our country. Owning a home is a part of that dream. It just is. Right here in America, if you own your own home, you're realizing the American dream. And so here are some of the ways to address the issue. First, the single greatest barrier to first-time home ownership is a high down payment. It is really hard for many, many low-income families to make the high down payment. And so that's why I've proposed and urged Congress to fully fund the American Dream Down Payment Fund.
Get rid of the down payment.
This will use money, taxpayers' money, to help a qualified low-income buyer make a down payment. And that's important. If one of the barriers to home ownership is the inability to make a down payment, and if one of the goals is to increase home ownership, it makes sense to help people pay that down payment. And we want to make the plan more robust. We want to make it more full all across America. Secondly, there is a lack of affordable housing in certain neighborhoods. Too many neighborhoods, especially in inner city America, lack affordable housing units. How can you promote home ownership if people can't afford the home? And so what I've done is propose what we call a single-family affordable housing tax credit to encourage the development of affordable housing in neighborhoods where housing is scarce. A third major barrier is the complexity and difficulty of the home buying process.
Listen to this, people.
There's a lot of fine print on these forms, and it bothers people.
It bothers people. It bothers people. It makes them nervous that they got to fill out the fine print or got to fill out forms that are going to check their credit. Also, understand what he's doing. He's telling these banks to get rid of the down payment, cut the fine print off of the forms, and all of this credit history, all that stuff. Cut that out of the forms. Streamline the process. Let's get these people into homes. Let's create what they call creative financing, option arms, and interest-only loans. All this stuff was initiated by the White House 8 months after 9/11, as this guy's taking us to a war, an unnecessary war, to start running up our debt. The economy was trash at this time. You got to think, this is 8 months after 9/11. No one wanted to fly. No one wanted to go out and shop. He actually goes and does this speech around this time in Illinois at O'Hare Airport, where he's actually encouraging people that you guys got to get back on the planes. You guys got to get back and start traveling. Go travel. Go see that. This is 8 months after 9/11. As he's selling war to us, we're getting ready to go to war. Go travel. But this is normalization. This is what he's doing. When he's doing this, when he goes to O'Hare and he's telling people, 8 months after 9/11, you guys got to get back and start shopping again. You guys got to get out and start spending money again. You guys got to get on the planes again because the economy was struggling. And this is an initiative. How's he going to show growth in the economy through the real estate market, people. Through the real estate market. This was a growth strategy so he can show growth. He had already cut taxes. The tax cuts had already happened. He actually cuts taxes another time, another major tax cut. So why he's taking us to war, they're cutting taxes and he's got to show growth. And so they do it through, they set up the housing bubble to crash. They knew that it would crash when they wanted it to crash. If you understand how it crashed with rumors about the liquidity of some of these banks that were holding derivatives that were derivative of the real estate market, and they were borrowing money on a daily basis through the repo market. And that's how they initiated the crash. Someone started spreading a rumor that these banks had no liquidity because they were holding all these derivatives. They crashed it when they wanted it to crash, when Obama was coming in, so Obama can come in and be the savior. But nobody went to jail. Obama didn't put anybody in jail. Obama didn't do anything to any of those bankers that did that. And then so they set this whole thing up. And then the socialists say, oh, see, that's why we need socialism, because capitalism failed, because capitalism failed because George Bush told all the bankers to not check credit history and just write, hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans to people with no down payments that they knew that weren't going to pay them back. They knew that.
And so therefore, what Mel has agreed to do and Alfonso Jackson have agreed to do is to streamline the process, make the rules simpler so everybody understands what they are. Makes the
rules simpler to close people in homes that couldn't afford them. They knew they couldn't afford them.
Jackson have agreed to do is to streamline the process, make the rules simpler so everybody understands what they are. Makes the closing much less complicated. We certainly don't want there to be a fine print preventing people from owning their home.
So make the rules less complicated, get rid of the down payment, all of this stuff. I mean, we're only halfway through this video, which goes into all of these initiatives that they set up. I don't know how clear I have to make this for you. The deregulation went on during the brother from another mother during George H.W. Bush's first son's administration. And then the setup for the crash went on during George H.W. Bush's second son's administration. And then the cover up went on during the administration of their cousin. And this guy was there in the Senate the whole time. He was there in the Senate the whole time, except when he was the vice president of the cousin. So the Hill, and there's been a lot of Hills, people. The Hill hero thing, I was thinking about this, that's what these people do. It's all about subversion. I was thinking about, a couple of elections where there was the Hill hero situation in the 2016 election. So you're maybe saying to yourself, well, if Hillary Clinton wants socialism and Barack Obama wants socialism, then why are they fighting against Bernie Sanders? Why didn't Hillary Clinton allow Bernie Sanders to get the nomination in 2016? He's a Democratic socialist. If she wants socialism, then she should have been for Bernie Sanders. No, Bernie Sanders was a Hill. Bernie Sanders was playing the role of the Hill. Bernie Sanders was in on it the whole time in 2016. He's a Hill. Or he's the hero, and she's set up to be the heel. Whichever, it depends on which side you're on. But you know how I know Bernie Sanders is playing the role of a heel or hero, whichever role he's playing in this, but they're working together, is because in 2016, after it came out that he and his supporters were being cheated, he endorsed her. That tells you everything. Always relate what Bernie Sanders did in endorsing Hillary Clinton after she had cheated him. And it was proven that the DNC was working together with Hillary Clinton's campaign to cheat him and his supporters. And then he still endorses or still endorsed her. I mean, that's so evident that they're working together, that they have the same agenda. But he comes at it, he comes in it that I'm a democratic socialist and that's what I want. And he's playing that role. Hillary Clinton wants it too, but she can't come out and say it. So, I mean, they're working together. But what I relate Bernie Sanders and what he did in 2016 in endorsing Hillary Clinton after she was caught cheating him and his supporters is to what Ron Paul did in the 2012 election. In the 2012 election, Ron Paul was running in that primary against Mitt Romney. Ron Paul felt that he had got cheated in Iowa. I mean, there was some fishy stuff going on. I mean, it's a caucus in Iowa. And I mean, that basically, if Ron Paul would have won Iowa, who knows, what could have happened in that primary. But it set the tone for the rest of the primary. They run the primary to the end. Ron Paul wants a speaking spot at the convention that year in Florida. Mitt Romney refused to give, and he wasn't playing ball. So Ron Paul said, all right, I'm not going to endorse you. And Mitt Romney needed Ron Paul's endorsement in 2012. As a matter of fact, if Ron Paul would have endorsed Mitt Romney in 2012, it might have made the difference. I don't know if it could have overcome the other major obstacles that Mitt Romney had, namely being Mormon and being a centrist in that political environment, but it could have made a difference. But Ron Paul did not. He refused to endorse Mitt Romney. Now, that tells me that Mitt Romney and Ron Paul were not working together. That Mitt Romney and Ron Paul were ideologically different. But when this guy who's running against the corporate elite, the billionaire, the trillionaire, billionaires, millionaires and billionaires, you don't say millionaires anymore, the billionaires, and then he endorses, this is the Hill. This is what I'm telling. Give you another example of a Hill election. In 2004, when this guy ran against his fraternity brother, John Kerry. John Kerry runs as the Democratic nominee. Bill Clinton or George Bush runs as the Republican nominee. We're at odds with one another, even though we're skull and bones fraternity brothers, went to Yale at the same time. We have all of these other, things that we're aligned on, but they played that role. And then what happened in that election? That the election was over the very next morning, while votes are still being counted. George Bush's fraternity brother drops out and concedes the election while votes are still being counted. They completely rigged that election, and the fraternity brother, Skull and Bones fraternity brother. This is the heel, hero, antagonist, protagonist, scheme, I guess, plot. It's very effective in wrestling. It's very effective in politics, but it's not only people that play a role. I give you another heel that I'm starting. This Candace Owens. Not only Candace Owens, some of these other people, man, these antagonists with podcasts. Some of these people are agents, people. Candace Owens plays a very effective role because you have to, when you have a conspiracy going on, you have to flood the field with noise so people don't get the signal. So you flood the field with misinformation and disinformation because it hides and masks the real information. So you can't really, and I've noticed that this is what's going on since a lot of people are going to alternative media. There's signal out there, but people aren't getting the signal because there's so much noise. And people like Candace Owens, people talking about, the microphone exploded and killed. I mean, that's disinformation. That's misinformation designed to create noise to block the signal. So this Candace Owens thing, I'm like, she's playing a role here because if anybody has any questions about this Charlie Kirk assassination and anyone who deviates from the official narrative, they're being associated with Candace Owens, who's the heel. She's playing the role of the heel. I mean, Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden, the heel. But it's not only people in that relationship. There's nations that have played the heel. That's what I want to get to. That Russia, so we were talking in the last podcast, we ended in the last podcast playing the clip of Yuri Bezmenov, who was the Russian defector from the USSR, in this interview he gave with G. Edward Griffin in the early 80s after he had defected to the United States. And he's talking, and we played the clip in the last podcast because he says that Western imperialists, Western corporations are propping up the communist system. I don't want to play it again. I don't have time to play it again, but he says Western imperialists, because he goes further into it in the clip that I'm about to play. But Western imperialists, Western corporations, Western imperialists, Western corporations are supporting the USSR, are propping them up. Why? To be the heel. Propping the USSR up to be the heel. In this heel hero, antagonist, protagonist role that we're trying to play. And he says that's what Yuri Bezmenov is talking about, these Western imperialists. And I asked the question, who are these Western imperialists? We've been talking about them. But Yuri goes further into it. He is explaining the 4 stages of ideological subversion, communist subversion, which he explained was the slow process of subverting the United States, undermining the United States from within. And there's 4 stages. The first stage was demoralization. We talked about demoralization, and I'm going to continue pointing out how the effort to demoralize Americans over decades has been very effective. You see it in our culture, that the entire culture is nihilistic and demoralized, and that's by design. It's what Yuri is talking about there. Why is demoralization is important? Well, you look at Alexander Tyler's cycle. It says it goes from bondage to faith, from faith to courage, from faith and courage to liberty. So this is what demoralization is about. The reason that they have to demoralize you first in this process of ideological communist subversion is because you can't have faith and courage. Morale is what faith and courage is. And faith and courage leads to liberty in this process. You can't have faith and courage. What you need to have is complacency and apathy. That's what we need. If you're the elite and you're trying to create this system of total bondage, technocratic bondage, then you can't have faith and courage. That's why you have to demoralize. You need complacency and apathy. So that was the first stage in this ideological communist subversion. But Yuri gets into the other stages here. And again, remember, we're talking about the fact that he says that the Western imperialists, the Western corporations are propping up the Soviets and the communist system.
The next stage is destabilization. This time, subvert.
The stage after, there's 4 stages. The stage after demoralization is destabilization, to destabilize the nation.
The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. What matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks.
Stage 3 is crises. Stage 3 is crises. That's why I'm explaining. That's why I'm telling you, people, that in this period of time, when we go from almost being at a period where we're going to pay off all of our debt. In 2000, our total national debt, the public treasury, was under $6 trillion. And they were predicting secretly that in 10 years, at the rate the United States was going, that the United States was going to be completely debt-free. No debt. No debt. So in this period of time, over the past 26 years that this debt has been growing to $40 trillion, it has been brought about by crises after crises after crises under the administrations of these people. Crises after crises after crises. Actually, starting in the Bush administration, the crises of 9/11, from the crises of 9/11 to the banking crises and housing crises. From that crisis, then, you move into the COVID crises that happened in 2020. I'm sure there's others that I'm not thinking of, but those are the major ones. 9/11, which from that crisis took us to the war on terrorism, the banking crisis and housing crisis. The other thing about the banking and housing crisis is that when they set up the housing crisis and they knew that the crash was going to happen, and then there was going to be all of this housing inventory on the market because we're in a housing crisis and this crash, then you have companies like Vanguard and BlackRock, which are part of this, that come and start scooping up all of this property, paying cash for it. And then now they own all this property because they scoop it up because they set up the crash. But that was also part of the plan, that when the crash happens, they're all going to get rich off the crash. And then the major corporations like Vanguard and BlackRock get to scoop up all of this property, really cheap because you just had a housing crash. They set all that up. But it's crises. It's from crises to crises to crises. And it's a managed crisis that they're using to advance their goal. That's what Yuri is talking about here. So stage 3 is crisis. What are the 4 stages of ideological subversion? Demoralization, then destabilization, then crises. And then he's going to get to the 4th one here in a moment.
In this part of the world.
Actually, we've already talked about the 4th one. We're going to talk with the 4th one is what George Bush did after 9/11. That's the 4th one. I'm not going to even tell you what the 4th one is. We'll get Yuri to tell you, but I've been explaining how after 9/11, after crises that they controlled happen, that George Bush starts to implement ideological subversion measure number 4. So does Obama. They both do.
The process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization.
Normalization is number 4. Normalization is number 4. Demoralization, destabilization, crises, and then normalization after the crisis. This is what George Bush was doing. Like I told you, after the crises, after 9/11, when people didn't want to go to the stores and shop anymore, they didn't want to fly anymore, they didn't want to travel, they suffered this trauma from this crisis of a terrorist attack on American soil, 3,000 Americans killed, and this terrible thing that happens, the shock that people felt, and his job was the normalization, that he had to get everybody back to normal, back to flying, back to shopping, back to what they were doing before the crisis, so they can continue that, so you're back to normal. The war is raging, overseas in Iraq and in Afghanistan. But while the war is going on and while the debt is being run up, you're making money off your real estate. You're selling real estate. You're what they call them, the real estate guys that were flippers. They were flipping houses while the war's going on in Iraq, running up your debt. It's not even funny, man. It's not even funny. People are just flipping houses and making all this money off of real estate until the crash came. But his job was to do number 4 in ideological subversion, is to get everybody back to normal. Normalization is number 4.
America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. He will go to Moscow to kiss the bottoms of new generation of Soviet assassins, never mind. He will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control. Situation is disgustingly out of control. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. United States is in the state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system. And the initiator of this war is not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system. However ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system, or
it's a world communist system. He says that it's not the Russian, whoever's running Russia at any given time, Stalin, Khrushchev, whatever. That's not the person who's your enemy. It's not Mao in China or Chavez in Cuba. That's not. Yuri says it is a global communist system that has taken over in the United States.
It's not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system. However ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system or the world communist conspiracy, whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot. If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you. But you don't have to be paranoid about it. What actually happens now, that unlike myself, you have literally several years to live on unless the United States wake up. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect to, unless you want to live in Antarctica with penguins. This is it. This is the last country of freedom and possibility.
Okay, so what do we do? What is your recommendation to the American people?
All right, so this is a very important part because he gives this dire warning to the United States. This is in 1980. G. Ed Griffin says, what's the answer? And I love his answer. Again, let's remember the crises that we've identified that threaten the United States right now in our third century. We have an election crisis. Number two, the education crisis is so important because, as he says, that the demoralization comes through the education system, that they have designed the education system to make students care about nothing but superficial things like Jimmy's got two mommies, what your gender is, and all this stuff. Social studies. They don't teach history. They don't teach, the trivium and quadrivium. They don't teach people how to think critically. That's all by design. The education crisis, the debt crisis. Been talking about that, all brought about through treason. The racial tribalism is all a part of that superficial education. Indoctrination. They reinforce the racial tribalism in the education system. So the education system is very important. And Brezhnev, who is the Russian defector from the USSR, is asked after giving this dire warning to the United States, what's the answer? What should we do?
Antarctica with penguins. This is it. This is the last country of freedom and possibility.
Okay, so what do we do? What is your recommendation to the American people?
Well, the immediate thing that comes to my mind is, of course, there must be a very strong national effort to educate people in the spirit of real patriotism, number one. Number two, to explain them the real danger of...
So it has to be a national effort to re-educate the public, to re-educate the youth. And that's an imperative. This is the crisis. The education crisis, the number one thing that we've identified, or number two crises that we've identified. The education crisis, that to If you really want to stop what is going on, the ideological and communist subversion that's going on in the United States, then you have to take control of the education system. You have to get rid of the Department of Education. You have to, I believe, have a free market, education system where you give people credits to go and choose their own education, whoever, and make it competitive, because this has to be something, has to be a national effort, like what Yuri says, a national effort to readjust. The first thing he says.
Patriotism, number one. Number two, to explain them the real danger of socialist, communist, whatever, welfare state, big brother government. If people will fail to grasp the impending danger of that development, nothing ever can help United States. You may kiss goodbye to your freedom, including freedoms to homosexuals, to prison inmate. All these freedoms will vanish, evaporate in 5 seconds, including your precious lives. The second thing, the moment at least part of United States population is convinced that the danger is real, they have to force their government. And I'm not talking about sending letters, signing petitions, and all this beautiful, noble activity. I'm talking about forcing United States government to stop aiding communism.
Listen to what he's saying. So early on, we're asking the question, who are these Western imperialists that he's talking about? He says Western imperialists are supporting and aiding the USSR. Why would Western imperialists and Western corporations be aiding the USSR and supporting the USSR? Why? Because the USSR is the heel. The USSR is set up to be the antagonist to the protagonist, the heel to the hero. And they have to set it up. This is the whole, same thing. This is what the Cold War, people, this is what the Cold War was. This is what it was. It was this heel, hero, protagonist, antagonist, dichotomy that they set up. This is what Yuri is saying. He says that the Soviet Union would have failed without the support of these Western corporation and Western imperialists. Listen to what he's saying.
Petitions and all this beautiful, noble activity. I'm talking about forcing United States government to stop aiding communism. Because there is no other problem more burning and urgent than to stop the Soviet military-industrial complex from destroying whatever is left of the free world. And it is very easy to do. No credits, no technology.
No credits, no technology. That the United States is giving Russia credits to buy arms. The United States is supporting Russia with technology. The United States is supporting Russia with grain and with food and all this stuff, going all the way back to Lend-Lease. I don't even have time to get into Lend-Lease, but this is what he's talking about. This is my opinion of why they killed John F. Kennedy, is because if you understand the timeline of when John F. Kennedy was killed, it was right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, and we were on the verge of having real nuclear war because Khrushchev was moving nuclear missiles into Cuba, and the United States, since the beginning of the Cold War and the end of World War II, the president of the United States and the leader in Russia, they weren't communicating with each other. The Cold War was going, and you had the buildup of the Warsaw Pact and NATO and all this, buildup going on, but the two sides were not communicating with one another. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Bobby Kennedy, John Kennedy's brother, opened up the line of communications between Kennedy and Khrushchev, that was the first time that they were talking. And they were saying, what's going on with this war and this conflict? We're on the verge of world war because of this Cuban Missile Crisis. And they started talking to one another and opened up communications. And if you listen to the speech that John Kennedy gave in June of 1963, just months before he was killed in November of 1963, you listen to that speech that he gives at that commencement at the American University, where he's talking about Russia and how Russia's not as bad as we said, that we have a lot in common with them, that we need to get along, we need to cut this war out. He was dead in 6 months because he was trying to run game on their game. He was trying to ruin their plot of this heel hero, antagonist, protagonist dichotomy that they had set up for us to buy into, like we're the audience at a wrestling match. And Kennedy was going to destroy that because he was opening up lines of communications. He didn't want the Cold War to continue. Kennedy likely saw through what was going on when he finally got on the phone and talked to Khrushchev. Probably suspected it. If you look at earlier speeches, like the one we played 2 podcasts ago that he gave right after the Bay of Pigs, debacle to the press corps, where he says, that there's a conspiracy that we're confronted with that uses subversion, uses, guerrillas by night instead of armies by day, that comprise vast human resources. Kennedy says he probably realized, he understood it. And then after talking to Khrushchev, he understood even more. And he was dead 6 months later, 5 months later. That's what I believe, that Kennedy was going to ruin their little game that they were running, that the Western imperialists, the United States, was supporting Russia. Supporting them is what Yuri says.
No other problem more burning and urgent than to stop the Soviet military-industrial complex from destroying whatever is left of the free world. And it is very easy to do. No credits, no technology, no money, no political or diplomatic recognition, and of course no such idiocy as grain deals to USSR.
Grain, money, technology, all this stuff was given, starting with Lease Lead. We'll get into Lease Lead in a moment. Talk about Prescott Bush. I don't have a lot more time. I brought up Prescott Bush, the father of George H.W. Bush, grandfather of George W. Bush, and I guess that would mean that he's the grandfather of Bill Clinton too, because Bill Clinton's the adoptive father, I guess, of Bill Clinton, according to Barbara Bush. The controversial rise of Prescott Bush. Prescott Sheldon Bush was born in 1895 in Columbus, Ohio. The young Prescott Bush showed academic and athletic promise at an early age. Eventually went to Yale, Skull and Bones, where his family was strong ties at Yale. Skull and Bones says there. On his graduation, he became captain in the Army. This is Prescott. Let's see where it talks about his family on the Mayflower. I wanted to draw a link. Oh, right here. It says right here. Prescott Bush was born on May 15th, 1895 in Columbus, Ohio. His family tree can be traced back to the Mayflower voyage, and his father, Samuel Prescott, who was a prosperous industrialist. So they have family that trace back to the earliest settlers here in the United States that go back to the Mayflower. You want to know who else has ties to this same family that was on the Mayflower? This guy. Who's this guy? Who's this guy? That's Barack Hussein Obama right there. This is Barack Hussein Obama's grandfather right there. Stanley Dunham. Stanley Dunham. Hold on. Where's Stanley Dunham? Let me show you. Barack Obama's grandfather, Stanley Dunham. Go to Ancestry on his Wikipedia page. Here. Dunham, Barack Obama's grandfather, is a direct descendant of Jonathan Singletary Dunham, a prominent early American settler who left the Plymouth colony to build his first grants mill in New Jersey. This is the same early American settler from Plymouth colony who was George H.W. Bush's, or Prescott Bush's ancestor, who was on the Mayflower. They were talking about, George, this is not about race, people. They got you talking about white supremacy and black fatigue and all this racial stuff going on. This is what the tribalism had. This is intentional. This is part of the rise. This is all intentional. We're going to get back into this in the next podcast, but it's not about race, people. This is about bloodlines. And Barack Obama shares a bloodline with George H.W. Bush, with George W. Bush, you can see right here. In addition to his grandson, Barack Obama, Stanley Dunnan's distant relatives include 6 U.S. presidents: James Madison, Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson, Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush. And so this is family. It's a family thing, people. This is a family thing. And if you understand Prescott Bush, I already explained that Prescott Bush was the one who organized the censure of Joseph McCarthy because McCarthy was sniffing out the communist subversion. So Prescott Bush didn't want Joseph McCarthy sniffing out the communist subversion. So he organized the censure of him. But just like George H.W. Bush was the, political mentor of Bill Clinton to the point where Bill Clinton sees him as a father figure. Prescott Bush, Senator Prescott Bush, also had a political protege that he was mentored to. This guy, Richard Milhouse Nixon. And just like Bill Clinton, who is the protege of his political mentor, George H.W. Bush, became president of the United States. Prescott Bush's political protege, Richard Milhouse Nixon, also made it as high as vice president in the 1950s. He was vice president to Dwight Eisenhower and then later became president himself. He was the protege of Prescott Bush. And like I was telling you in the last podcast, Prescott Bush worked for Brown Brothers Harriman. This is the bank that he worked for. He was a banker prior to becoming a senator of Connecticut. And his fraternity brother, Averell Harriman, founded the bank. They were business partners. But Averell Harriman was a Democrat and Prescott Bush was a Republican. Now, do you think Prescott Bush and Averell Harriman, who are fraternity skull and bones brothers, they work for the same bank? Do you think they have that they're that much different politically, that this guy's a Republican and his fraternity brother that he's a banker with is a Democrat? No, this is the protagonist, antagonist, heel, hero plan. That one of you going to be a Republican, one of you going to be a Democrat, and we're going to work the system from each side. Averell Harriman, skull and bones fraternity brother, friends with Prescott Bush, who was a banking business with him. Prescott Bush was a Republican. Averell Harriman was a Democrat. Prescott Bush was supporting the Nazis. Prescott Bush was supporting the Nazis. How Bush's grandfather helped the Nazis rise to power. How did Prescott Bush help the Nazis rise to power? Is because Prescott Bush was in business with this guy, Fritz Thyssen. Fritz Thyssen was a steel industrial. He was basically the Carnegie of Nazi Germany. It says right here, Fritz Thyssen, German leading industrial families. He was a robber baron of Germany at that time, very wealthy. He was an early supporter and financial backer of the Nazi Party. Prescott Bush was in business with Fritz that helped bring the Nazi Party to rise. At the same time, his fraternity brother and banking partner was the ambassador to the Soviet Union, working for FDR as a Democrat. So this guy is in Russia, and his business partner, Prescott Bush, who's senator, is doing business in Germany. I don't even have very much more time to hash this out for you people. But yes, this is what Yuri is talking about. Not only were we supporting Russia, and lease lead, then lease.
In early January of 1941, FDR asked Congress if he could do things a little differently. He wanted the power to lend and or lease weapons to American allies.
Averell Harriman was running all this. I I don't even have time to, I may pick this back up in the next podcast because there's a very little bit more that I want to share to hash this out before we get back into the racial tribalism that's being forced on us right now to divide us so we don't recognize what these guys have done to us and what they are doing to us. We'll see what we get into in the next podcast. Hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you on Friday.